All right, let's talk about something not at all controversial, the gear system in World of Warcraft. There was a tweet recently this week by THD that kind of sparked a lot of discussion in the community as to what the current state of gearing is looking like for World of Warcraft. And he says, let's be honest, the only reason I hear of guilds disbanding after clearing Mythic is because no one wants to do Fated 2.0, and Mythic Plus should not give Myth Track level gear. Crest in the upgrade system has completely ruined any sense of gear progression from the game due to people who don't enjoy games and just want items 1 week into a patch. And now instead we have 50 duplicates of the same item that simply get upgraded to max eye level. He also goes on to further state later on, it's only more fun because it's easy rewards. Mythic Plus is some of the worst content imaginable. This is obviously a fictional boogeyman. We're going to talk about this in a second. I eventually sent out a tweet that said, this gearing system that we currently have is epic. Do not be fooled into thinking that Myth Track gear should only come from the raid. Additionally, you don't even get Myth Track gear from Mythic Plus. You get it from the vault. You're literally getting heroic gear from end of dungeon 20s. It's a completely different system. There was also a tweet at me from the Ascent Twitter that says, but at the same time, you can't expect something that is infinitely farmable to stand along something that is not and have the same expectations of item level. So what's the solve to get them closer to opportunity / reward? I said functionally you can make them heroic raid, have no loot lockout, and achieve the same thing if you really wanted to. I felt like I was at a pretty noticeable disadvantage not raiding this tier. You get something like 1/4 of the Myth Track loot over somebody who raids. I ended up wearing a ton of crafted gear. This was particularly true, and I would say like weeks 3 through 10 of the season. Towards the end of the season, you get about the same level loot, but I would say about the weeks 3 through 10, there was a pretty noticeable disadvantage. And Relo, I think, had a pretty good take where he said, and as someone who doesn't do Mythic Plus might as well just not progress the raid the first few weeks. It's the same issue. And it's not about finding the time to do it, but actually wanting to do the content. There are people who only want to raid, and there are people who only want to do Mythic Plus. And it's kind of funny that we've reached this point where raiders are now complaining about having to do Mythic Plus, because Mythic Pluses for a very long time were complaining that they had to raid. And raiders were kind of raid logging. In addition to that, let's jump in and talk about the state of raiding post that Dobie made on the Community Council forums. I think that it kind of gives a good insight into the raiding perspective on the gearing solution. Once upon a time, farming the raid meant you were passively nerfing the raid every week through incremental power gains, and this is no longer the case. We reach about 90% of our maximum power by the time we get to the last boss, and this equates to a hard final few bosses, but it also kind of means that they never get easier on farm. Additionally, the eye level jump between tiers is a contributing factor. There used to be a benefit if we farmed full BIS, it would give us a small advantage in the next tier, but that doesn't really exist anymore. Instead, what exists is an endless Mythic Plus farm sesh the first week of the tier that completely replaces everything except for our tier sets, and this is frankly pretty toxic. WordUp also had I would argue, a very good tweet saying that the gear discussion coming up, and again, the current system is better than it has been in the past. I don't like, however, that gear checks are gone. It's better from a player mental POV to get gear checked and kind of hope that it will end up ending. Getting skill checked, though, at the beginning of the season turns into a soul-crushing grind. And he says that he thinks that there is a way to time gate the upgrade tracking, invest crests, and to bump the track or something. That might end up helping. Whatever they do, though, they need players to blame it on something early, other than, I guess I'm really bad at the game, and just kind of burn out. And without gear there isn't one of those release valves. I also think that part of this problem, too, is that Blizzard's trying to fit effectively 3 difficulties into Mythic Raid, where, the first 4 bosses are incredibly easy. Gnarlroot, Agira, Volcaros, and Council are all incredibly easy. And then there's a step up with, Naimu and Laradar and Smolderon. That's slightly harder. And then there's just a chasm, and you have Tendril and Fire-Rack at the end of it. And that is just a colossal jump. And so Blizzard's trying to fit, effectively 3 difficulties in Mythic rating, and you have the same level loot for the first 4 bosses that you do for the last 2, and those are functionally not the same difficulty at all. Those are... The difference between those, the first 4 and the final 2, is just as large of a jump as it is from normal to Mythic itself. So, let's kind of talk about my opinions real quick. First and foremost, Mythic Plus should not give Myth level gear. This is a bad take from THD. I fundamentally disagree. I think that there are other issues with Mythic Plus gearing, but if anything, Mythic Plus gives probably too little Myth track level gear, especially relative to raid. Raiders going to be fully geared out just from being able to do the raid. They have more opportunities at Myth track level gear. For Mythic Plusers, the only opportunity at Myth track level gear is getting it via the vault. And functionally, the vault is completely random just due to the nature of the vault. If anything, I would love to see something maybe a little bit more either deterministic or honestly just doubling the amount of Myth track level gear that you get from Mythic Plus. You could even do something like the Hero Cache quest that you get sometimes, where one of your pieces of gear is going to be from the vault. The other one is from, some arbitrary source where you do 4 Mythic Plus dungeons, you get 1 Myth track level piece, or you get 1 heroic level piece, depending on what level the keys are. I think, if anything, you're getting too little Myth track level gear from Mythic Plus. Now, for hero track level gear, I think that there is a large issue with hero track level gear, and I've always kind of said this, that I think that the spammable nature of Mythic Plus gearing is a problem, where especially if you're looking to farm one piece of gear and you're a solo player, you have to run a dungeon about 30 to 35 times to guarantee that piece is going to drop. Whereas if you're running in a 5 stack, you only have to run the dungeon 4 to 5 times to guarantee that piece is going to drop, assuming that people can trade it to you. And assuming that people are all the same armor type and looking for the same piece or whatever, right? But I think that's a big issue with the spammable nature of Mythic Plus and just farming gear in general. But on top of that, also, just the amount of hero and heroic raid level gear that you're getting jumpstarts you in a way that it doesn't from other content sources, and that kind of equates to a problem. Now, they could make it equal if they wanted to by adding no loot lockout to heroic raid, but I think a lot of people would agree that that's not necessarily very fun. And so I think that like a fundamental system change is probably in order, where you're able to get more Myth track level gear from Mythic Plus, because again, Mythic Plusers should have access to high eye level end of dungeon rewards or high eye level gear. But I don't think that this system that Relo kind of outlines here, where you have to do Mythic Plus for content because the end of dungeon rewards are too strong and you might not progress the raid the first few weeks. That, to me, if we've reached that level, that seems like an issue, because you are, and it's like pointed out here, you're completely replacing all of your gear the first week just to kind of deal with it. Now, I will say that I think that this gearing system is significantly superior than it has been in the past. And as somebody who didn't necessarily raid this tier, I did still feel like I was at a disadvantage, again, particularly in weeks 2 through 12. The amount of Myth track level gear that I got relative to people who were raiding Mythic was noticeable. Like, you had a lot less opportunities at just getting high eye level gear. But you eventually reached a point where crafting gear and profession level gear was good enough to kind of carry you and get you over the line to where you're close enough, right, to be competitive. And that's kind of what you want. You don't necessarily need to be full BIS. If you want to be full BIS, you probably have to raid and do Mythic Plus. And that's just the reality of the situation, is that you're probably going to have to do both. And you're also going to have to hope to the vault. But I think that there's definitely some middle ground that can be achieved. I also think that Blizzard, this tier, just kind of outlining it, there was a 30 item level jump between the tiers. This tier, which is a good thing in the sense of it incentivizes people to do other difficulties of the raid, particularly heroic and normal. It makes them, it gives a significant advantage to doing them whenever the tier jump between Avarice and Amir Jasil was 30 item levels. But at the same point, then it also further incentivizes a more arduous Mythic Plus grind, where the Mythic Plus grind is more important and it's a larger grind because there's every piece of gear needs to be replaced. There's basically no pieces of gear that need to be replaced. And we also have some other cool things that have happened over the course of the entire expansion. I think the Catalyst unlocking week 1 is a good thing, but at the same point, it does kind of de-incentivize you being forced to raid, which as a Mythic Plus player, I think is a great solution. I am a huge fan of not feeling forced to raid whenever I don't want to. But at the same point, I think that something with the end of dungeon reward system needs to change. I'm just going to circle back here. This take by THD, that Mythic Plus should not give myth level gear, is a boogeyman. It's a bad take. The crest and upgrade system ruining any sense of gear progression, also a terrible take. If anything, Titan Forging was worse for the game than what we have right now, where you would infinitely spam Mythic Plus loot just or Mythic Plus just praying to God that you would Titan Forge something. That was arguably a worse system than what we have currently. So bringing this up right now is just horrible. And then he also says it's only more fun because it's easy rewards and Mythic Plus is some of the worst content imaginable. Like, this is just a terrible take. But I do think that there is some truth in what the sentiment of, end of dungeon 20s rewarding too much hero track gear. I think that, and with in conjunction with the gear system, that has definitely created a weird dynamic and something that Blizzard might be looking at into the future. I don't know how I feel necessarily about the profession system. Now, the profession system keeps, Mythic Plusers and people who aren't necessarily playing at a high eye level, it keeps them pretty close to max level gear, which isn't bad, right? It makes it feel for me like I don't have like a significant disadvantage and reach that state where you're kind of like apathetic. You end up in that situation where you're like, why play? But at the same point, there has to be like a fundamental question of like, is this healthy for the game for you to be able to have access to such high level gear just from crafting? And I don't really know the answer. Overall, though, these are just kind of my opinions on the state of gearing and kind of the state of how things are working out. I'm really interested in your thoughts and expressing your opinions down below. And I will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.